the world has had enough of the rich using developing countries as battering rams for their own development. Rich corporations and individuals that don't care about the economic fabric of your own country, but rather care about their own selfish motivations, their own profit-driven incentives. When these rich corporations are allowed to go and buy entire areas that not only give them economic capital inside your own country, but also gives them political leverage, because they're the sole investors and sole owners of these areas. Meaning that municipalities have to listen to what they say, have to bow down to their claims over that land. We think that that sort of ownership, that sort of breach of sovereignty is unjustified. Two burdens in this debate today. First of all, how foreign owners hinders the ability of these countries to develop, and secondly, how it facilitates a form of gentrification in these countries. My second speaker is going to come up and talk about why it's immoral for people coming from developed countries to benefit off of this land. What is the model that we propose in our house today? First of all, we think that there is no ownership of land by entities that have a majority foreign ownership, whether this be individuals or whether this be corporations. Second, we think that these governments, if they want foreign investment, will have to set up export processing zones or investment capsules, as seen in both Bangladesh and India and multitude of other developing countries. These are areas in which foreign corporations can lease or rent land where foreign corporations are concentrated, meaning that 20 or 30 different corporations share the same area of land. Finally, any other benefits that the government wants to give these corporations, like tax breaks and tax holidays, in order to make their countries more attractive to foreign direct investment, will all still apply under our world. What does then the comparative of the two worlds look like? We think that under their world, where these corporations are allowed to own land, any corporation is able to come into your country and bid out that land if it is for sale, meaning that they can occupy and buy any land that is up for sale. Under our world, the government has exclusive control as to where these corporations are located, what their level of involvement is in the local community, and they're able to cluster these companies in a specific area to limit their sphere of influence, both politically and economically. Before I move on,
would you ban people above a certain income bracket from buying land from the poor?
If that comes at the cost of displacement of the poor, or it comes at the cost of gentrification of these poor people in their land, to the point that they can't live on their land, then sure, we're all right with limiting that as well. Why do foreigners want to own that? For corporations, the incentives are simple. They want to tap into different markets, or cheaper labor, or lower property taxes that reduces their cost of production relative to if they were producing in their own country. For individuals, it's a method by which they want to protect their wealth, meaning that it's safer to invest in a developing countries because the property taxes are less, you'll be charged less by the government for keeping your money here, but it's also as investment in speculative markets. If the price of land is on the rise in Bangladesh or India, then this is a lucrative market for individuals to tap into. Note that these incentive structures all cater to the personal benefits of these corporations, meaning that even if they can show that some corporations deserve some freedom, the fact that that freedom comes at the cost of the economic fabric of these particular countries means that we have the ability to limit that freedom in and of itself. First argument about how it hinders the ability of these countries to develop. What are developing countries look like? These are countries with extremely high population densities, extremely high rates of poverty, a widening wealth gap, and are countries that are primarily dependent on primary and secondary tiers of production. But also, these are emerging markets, meaning that in the next 20 or 25 years, these countries, if allowed to develop on their own, can create an environment in which their own economy proliferates and they become a tier 2 country in and of itself. What do these countries want then in order to facilitate that growth? First of all, foreign direct investment. We recognize that these countries oftentimes want foreign direct investment in their own countries in the form of investing in their own local companies to bolster their own local trade. They want certain other MNCs to set up branches on their local land so that their economy also proliferates. Secondly, these developing countries want to specialize because most developing countries have a niche that they can tap into. For Bangladesh, it was the jute trade, the garments trade. For countries in the Horn of Africa or in the western coast of Africa, it's the mineral trade, it's the trade of gold and other precious metals. Third, meaning that these countries need to have a roadmap on which they can rely. Third, these countries are heavily incentivized for poverty alleviation. They want to ensure that the average citizen has more purchasing power, so that they can live themselves out of poverty. Finally, these countries want to maintain a roadmap. What does this roadmap look like? This roadmap looks like development that is center outwards, meaning that they can start developing at the center. Once these urban centers are created, they can expand outwards. Sporadic, random development of places that are of no strategic and economic value to them is extremely harmful for them, because that limits their ability to allocate resources where it is necessary. Why are all of these incentives better under a world where these companies are no longer able to own land? Because once you limit their ability to own land, you also limit their ability to distort the planning that the government has made. What does this look like? This means that the government, now that corporations on their own volition cannot create the industries that they want, governments have better control over what kind of jobs are created, what kind of industries, in what tier of production are propped up, where that industry is created, as to how it can benefit the maximum amount of people, or how it can create employment for people that can avail that employment. But also, it allows governments to cluster these corporations together in a way that cancels out their political influence, meaning that one company can in no way dictate the terms of their own state. This means that employment is more consistent because you are able to have stronger laws due to the erosion of lobbying power from these corporations. This means better job security for people in these countries and better industrial protection, because the terms of the state are dictated by the government. Finally, second argument, as to how it facilitates gentrification. Because when corporations go and buy these places, they outbid these places and increase the price of the land they stay in. In Kolkata, tobacco companies bought out slums and increased the price of land to the point that the regular average person could not avail it. The incentives are that these lands are cheap and the economic zones that they create are beneficial for them. But once they buy them, this results in forced displacement, or even if it's not, it makes sure that the places are so expensive to stay in that the local citizens have to move out of that place if they want to maintain their own standard of living. This is particularly important for a number of reasons. Firstly, because this happens often in remote locations that are home to many tribes, many minorities, because those are the places that have populations with the least political capital. The protection of them is particularly important because they have the least ability to relocate, the least ability to preserve their own way of life. In a world where we allow these corporations to dictate how they buy land and when they do so, we think that you erode their ability to stay within their own countries. That is an immoral sense that we must not.
Zero thoughts on anything to do with land. That's what we heard from side proposition. They wanted a generic debate about whether government should be able to influence the kind of roadmap in which development happens in their country, not discussing the actual debate at hand. Whether foreign individuals should be able to own land within the country. They just wanted a generic debate about multinational corporations. We're sorry, but that's not what this is about. We cannot buy into a policy whose harms land on the poor. What do we stand for, right? We're happy to influence institute basic regulations in these countries. Antitrust laws, insider trading regulations, things like restrictions on political campaign contributions. So if they want to talk about political influence, that is something we can regulate. But what is the kind of land that actually gets bought out by foreign owners? It's not natural resources land, because usually these are state-owned. It's not the most agriculturally productive land, because there's no reason to sell these land and people are benefiting from it. It's often barren, over-cultivated land that the developing world is so rampant with. But remember, right, as a state, we can still selectively choose to buy back land or have practices like eminent domain, but that is a high bar for that, a bar that they do not meet, that they never try to meet. The comparative is whether we can filter out and regulate foreigners or whether they should never be able to own land, right? In developing countries, in some countries, incentivize foreign owners to come in and buy land through things like subsidies. Some others profit from foreign owners by taxing them at a higher rate. They want a broad strokes ban where they don't care for the unique needs of every developing nation. They just pretend pretend that Ghana, India, and Zimbabwe are all at the same economic level. Obviously, we can also increase investments in things like public housing. So if they want to describe gentrification, that's something we can still regulate. Three arguments here. There is a right to sell land. Second, there is a win-win for the poor on the ground. Second speaker argument on how reasonable speculation in developing nations is useful. Three areas of response. First, on the horrific stance that was so broad. Second, on the idea of a widening gap. And third, on gentrification. First, let's describe this. I'm sorry to Bangladesh, but this debate is about foreign individuals owning land. It is not a generic debate about all foreign investment, right? But what did they take on the burden of defending? Literally 80% of the world's capital disappearing because they want no multinational corporations to come into your areas. This is a world where multinational corporations are the only ones with the capital, the ability to build infrastructure and bring in massive employment and skills training into the developing world are multinational corporations that don't have a profit incentive to enter developing nations on their side of the house. They say then that they prefer a world with crippling poverty and rampant unemployment because that's what developing nations looked like previous to the entry of some employment and some industrialization. They want an over-dependence on agriculture that governments across the world have been fighting so hard to erase. That's why they were so scared, right? That they were so scared about the lack of industrialization. They said, no, we will do all of these reasons and we will have all of these same issues, but we will give them special economic zones. But we will incentivize them to come in and develop industrialization without ever explaining to us how those two go hand in hand and how special economic zones are somehow uniquely beneficial without and independent of the other halves. But it was truly telling what the extent of their principle was. When in response to the POI, they say they will ban you from ever selling it to a person from a higher economic class if you could displace him. They are a side that didn't realize that poor individuals aren't just individuals who are stupid or don't have information. They were so patronizing. They said, no, it harms you. We know what's best for you. We will do it for you. We say, no, poor people should have the ability to sell. Finally, on the idea of gentrification, right? Look, the problem is that they fail to demonstrate how the majority of land investment is something that takes away, right? But even if it is something that's gentrifying, it's often done by domestic populations, which they were somehow happy to support because people who live in higher class houses for some reason were expats and were people from foreign nations, apparently these white people moving into Ghana. But second, right, if this is a debate indeed that's about housing, the vast majority of poor nations rely on renting, and by pushing these very individuals to take up renting, they hike the cost and displace individuals first from housing that is illegitimate. First argument that there is a right to sell. Why is this an unfair violation of property? We think the right to property is a natural right that derives from your humanness, and an extension of the right to property is the right not to own property. You should be allowed to determine who you sell to and how you sell to them, right? There's an autonomy over the terms of sale. Their bar doesn't meet the standard for this. It's a patronizing policy that doesn't realize that individuals might be desperately poor, that it might be a really bad time for the economy and they might not have a job, and they might have to move or have medical costs, right? They said, we know what you need. We think that's legitimate. But uniquely, you should have the ability and the freedom to sell to foreigners. Why? Because they bring in liquidity to the market. They bring in competition against oligopolies of contractors who are so powerful that they set prices and collude with each other and exploit the poor. Specifically, what is the alternate on their side? Local landowners being the only option for the poor to sell their land to. Why is that so egregious? In India, we see with zamindars and upper caste individuals. In Ghana, higher up tribes like the Asaran tribe in Ghana. The reason that this is problematic is because they create an imbalance that comes from a history of cultural and ethnic tension that is so strong that you are prosecuted if you even try to set the terms of your own land ownership. If you say, I will sell for this price, you will be prosecuted, you will be isolated from your community. In such a cultural context, crucially, the way in which foreign investors make profits is by saying, I will let you set your own terms. I will respect you as an individual if you have the ability to sit across the table from me. They retain the most poor in the same kinds of power asymmetries that we want to discard from a history of oppression. It's patronizing. It is an unfair ban that does not meet the actual standard that they have to make. Sure, I take that view.
If it is so true that the Jamindars dictate everything about the land, what if they say no to your foreigners coming in?
The way you have to realize that foreign investors have the power to go against the zamindars. They have the power because they're not subject to the same class hierarchies. They're independent of that, which means they have a profit incentive to tap a saturated, an unsaturated market. Like when they can go in and realize that these poor people want to sell land to investors, but they don't have the ability to set their own terms. That's the profit incentive engaged with that. Second, why is this a double win for the poor? Poor right now are stuck with unproductive land and can't escape their poverty. Two thoughts then. First, this creates better agricultural production. Three issues with land as its own now. It is fragmented. Millions and millions of people exist in the developing world, and over inheritances, splitting it among families with 10 children, they have become so small that you cannot actually agriculturally produce. Second, they are over-cultivated. Soil and its nutrition are depleted, and they are barren in the state they exist right now. Third, there is traditional unscientific agricultural practices, a lack of irrigation or technology. The crucial incentive of these investors is to amass big estates of land and use modern technology, high-yielding varieties of food grains, tractors, irrigation, which means they create food security for the first time in these developing nations. We saw this exactly in Zimbabwe, when the policy to kick out white farmers meant a huge dearth in the availability of food grains, which meant that the prices of basic necessities like food went up by a vast amount. That's just illegitimate. But second, right, it empowers the individual who sells. I am right now a person who's stuck in disguised unemployment in a piece of land that requires 2 people to cultivate, which my family of 10 cultivates. I'm seasonally unemployed in the winter and only employed in the summer. We give them a capital when they can get the money from selling the land and retrain themselves and enter industries, when they can set up small businesses for themselves, when they can, for the first time, break the vicious cycle of poverty that Team Bangladesh retains you with. We think we cannot buy into a policy whose harms land of the poorest. We are proud.
They lose this debate when they claim that MNCs are the best of all people, when they have no incentive to not disenfranchise the people that live in these regions, but they have all the incentives to be good to them. We've told you that many of the people whose land you're going to own are going to be people who are the most poorest of them, are going to be people like tribal people that live in suburban areas. In the vast majority of cases, these are the lands that you own, these are the lands that you buy out. I don't know why they have an incentive to cater to them in the vast majority of cases where these people have so less political capital that they cannot propose these sorts of disenfranchisement. They claim that we are up against MNCs and foreign investment. If that was really true, we wouldn't have given the model where we claim that we are ready to give them EPZs. We're ready to give them certain, lease out land that we think is going to be beneficial for the people. That is not a burden on our side of the house. We've told you why the exclusivity of land is extremely special. The fact that, one, it causes gentrification of the most vulnerable minorities. People who need this land, not just because they want some level of economic capital, but because it's often of religious and cultural value to them. But secondly, the fact that the massive increment in lobbying power that comes with the ownership of this land, where you can control the government simply because you can own this land and control it to such a massive degree. The government is tied to what you want from them. That is the exclusivity that they never back down. First of all, the horrible characterization that they come up with, that these are often over-cultivated land that gets owned. Notice this is an extremely narrowed down case. One, it's because most of the land is one that's owned by the poor, which is why it's so easy to buy them out and it's so cheap to begin with. That's the reason why you often go for those lands that are owned by the poor and not owned by the rich. But secondly, these are often lands that are owned by people that come from certain tribal minorities. That's the reason why you can often buy them with less money and have no political opposition. Often in a vast majority of cases, their cases are extremely best case scenarios. But in the vast majority of cases, these are often people that don't get any form of benefit at all. But secondly, they want to talk about how over-cultivated land cannot be used by these people. We think we have alternative ways to deal with these people as well, where we can hoard that money that the government, that these corporations get, because in your side of the house, the money gets transferred to all those other countries that they come from. We think in our side of the house, when the money stays in the hands of this government, we can increase public housing and those sorts of things, job sectors, etc., in order to cater to those people as well. Then they tell you that MNCs will increase employment, and that's an exclusive benefit on their side of the house. They never tell you why the employment will be in the hands of the people in these regions. We told you why. First of all, in the vast majority of cases, these are the foreigners that will be employed to begin with. Because these are the more skilled people who often have more training and education to deal with their particular job, to deal with their particular kind of business better than these local people. But secondly, often the local people have skill sets that doesn't coincide with the businesses that come in. In the vast majority of cases, Even training them up is a lot more costly than bringing in foreign contractors, foreign employees, and etc. And so why that incentive exists in the hands of these MNCs who often want to profiteer from this land to begin with. Lastly, MNCs will retain the most poor because the Jamindars are just more powerful. First of all, if that was really true, probably these Jamindars would have afforded the land for themselves. You need to admit that to some degree these MNCs have more control, have more power than these Jamindars. But the problem is this, they never tackle why that lobbying power doesn't disappear on your side of the house. When you control land and the way in which it gets operated, because there's no government regulation, where you can control who gets employed, because there's no government regulation as well, we think the amount of capital that you own and hold from this land is enough to give you enough lobbying power to ensure that the government listens to you and not ensure other terms of employment get imposed upon you. On our side of the house, the exclusive benefit is this. The EPZs are where more companies are constrained in a particular region. So that's to say the companies are not sparsely located in every single area of the country. So it's easier to regulate how they operate, how they carry out their operations. But secondly, in your world, this region has a single monopoly. That is to say, in a particular village there's one corporation, in another village there's another corporation that owns land. The problem with that is that there's a monopoly that controls those regions. It's hard to regulate those particular regions because all of those regions have just one monopoly. In our world, these EPZs are regions that are several companies existing together. We just say if one corporation leaves, there's often another corporation that takes up that job to begin with. We just say the extreme lobbying power for one particular corporation to dictate the terms of employment, to dictate how the operations carried out is massively reduced. Yes.
If your issue comes with sporadic purchase of land, why do you not support a completely controlled command economy over land?
We are not saying that we're supporting a command economy in the first place. We are saying that there has to be some level of government regulation which doesn't happen in your side of the house because of the way in which lobbying process cycles, all of that. I won't say why that's a comparative. But most importantly, you need to ensure we need to tackle the very important comparative that they never tackle. The fact that you buy land in suburbs because it is easier and less costly to set up factories over there. In the process, you take away land from many minorities like tribal people. They are unlikely to get anything in return because one, they have less political capital, so it's they're incapable to get some level of reparations from those governments, but no, thank you. But secondly, they're so economically unproductive to the extent that the government doesn't feel forced to listen to them. The harms of that is twofold. First, they don't only get employed because they're often uneducated to the extent that the government's educational resources never went to them. But secondly, they lose land that is of cultural and religious value to them. The one that's tangled up with identity and with no form of employment can benefit, that can cover up for that. First part of argumentation, we tell you why it's immoral to allow these developed countries to benefit off of the land they have prominently and previously harmed. Developing countries' land have been threatened by other countries at various points in time in terms of ownership and the usage of the land. This has historically disenfranchised the people living in those areas. The impacts of it still carry on today. Therefore, we have a moral obligation to ensure that the land remains in the hands of the people and not get owned and used even further by those very developed countries. How has the land and its people been threatened? One, the intuitive reason, the fact that at various points in time, developing countries have confronted the fear of colonialization by historically rich and powerful countries. Notice that the most number of people that will come and own this land in your side of the house are from those very developed countries that we harm. The forceful annexation that countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and India have faced, the fact that these people and inhabitants have been forced to confront forced migration. These people's agriculture and financial resources were plundered and were given no reparations. Even in several countries, they are still not economically alleviated. We tell you that we have a moral obligation not to just pay reparations, but even if that is not possible, we think it is profoundly moral to allow these countries to benefit off of the land even further, given that those historical plunder have not only hurt those minorities, but the fact that you've plundered those agricultural resources means these developing countries that still depend on these agricultural resources are still damaged. It is like handing over a resource that a particular thief has stolen and allowing him to use it even further. We think that's an important comparative that you need to admit. Even if some level of employment is handed over to these people, it can never cover up for those levels of economic and political hijacking that you have done in the past. But the fact that most of these local people will never be employed and these companies will never be forced to listen to this government's we have delegated power.
And they dropped our second argument on food security. Here's why that devastates that case. Structurally disadvantaged countries right now have individuals without access to food on the table, have structurally massive rates of malnutrition, of disease caused by a lack of access to food. Food insecurity perpetuates a vicious cycle of poverty, where children are literally unable to put food on the table. We save lives by expanding access to food security for the most vulnerable in these countries. It was damning to that case to not respond to this argument. We cannot buy into a policy whose harms land on the poor. 2 points of clash. Firstly, whether this policy is just, and secondly, the effects of structurally disadvantaged nations. Firstly, whether this policy is just. That second speaker gave us a principled argument about how developing countries face colonization and forceful annexation historically, and it is unjust therefore for foreign investors to benefit out of this land. 2 responses. 1. There is an important distinction here, and that important distinction is the fact that foreign investors are now paying to get this land and are employing people through buying this land. We think the best mechanism for them to pay reparations right now is to give these individuals employment, is to give these countries significant economic benefit. That is something you don't get. You want reparation? The best way is to give jobs to those who were historically denied this due to colonialism. But secondly, it's interesting, no fact, that the best mechanism of getting reparations for them was to restrict the rights of individuals in these nations to sell their land. We told you in our speech that this policy is unjust as a matter of principle because you have a right to sell your property. Because an extension of the right to have property is the right to not have property, the right to get money or based on that property. And crucially, isn't the alternative to these foreign investors is local landowners, local zamindars, people from ethnic majorities who come with a power asymmetry in terms of culture in these developing nations. They told us, they conceded that a lot of this land is owned by low-income people, by minorities, by indigenous communities. Who is more likely to be exploited? A foreign investor or someone in these countries who's literally from the ethnic majority that oppressed these minorities historically, who's likely to coerce these individuals into contracts with far higher degrees of structural harm. There is an asymmetry of power created by this gap in ethnicity. Foreign investors offer another option. They offer an option for you to sell your land without being exploited. You have a right to sell your land. That is something they fundamentally destroy. Second issue in this debate, on the effects on structurally disadvantaged countries. 2 big ideas that came from that. Firstly, no frankly, that this hinders the ability of these countries to develop. 3 things here. 1, they conceded to us in their first speech that one of the crucial goals of developing countries is the ability to gain foreign investment. It's interesting then why they were okay with a policy that will systematically restrict the amount of foreign investment which comes in. Why? Because rent isn't enough for foreign companies, because constant payment of rent adds up to much more amounts than the amount of money they need to invest in land right now. These companies want to own land, and they want to own land on their own terms, right? Because often particular regions are better for efficient production. What this means on their side of the house, no frankly, is that these companies are faced with massive regulations on where they're allowed to set up, forced into tremendous competition where they literally can't survive in concentrated regions. What this means is that on their side, these companies don't come in at all. This is devastating because it means people lose access to cheap goods. No, frankly, people lose access to infrastructure, access to employment. They had 2 attacks. One, they said, why don't these companies employ people in these regions? Very simple, because it's much easier to employ people in these regions than hope that people in the United States as a foreign investor migrate along with you to be employed in a country with significantly lower wages. They said this would create a monopoly. That's why we had regulations like antitrust laws in our model. But ultimately, a lot of these arguments are arguments against foreign investment in general. Why were they okay with foreign investment in their first speech? Why did they say that developing countries should see foreign investment as a crucial goal? Second, they say sporadic random debt limits hurt the ability of governments to allocate resources. Here's the thing, different regions are productive in different areas. We think companies should have the ability to choose which areas are the most productive for them to develop their goods and sell their goods. Lastly, they talk about lobbying power. We're happy to restrict the ability of foreign investors to lobby governments. Those are regulations which already exist in the status quo. But notice that all of these problems also exist with local investors, right? Wealthy individuals in these local areas. Which is why we asked them, are you okay with communizing the ownership of land? They said no, because they recognize the significant economic benefit that exists, no thank you, world with this kind of notion. Lastly, the second argument on facilitating gentrification. One, the alternative is that these investors are forced to rely on rented out land. Notice that low-income people also rely on rented out land. Now you create a market of wealthy individuals who are asking for rent, meaning rent prices go significantly up. In our side of the house, in contrast, where these individuals are able to develop communities, because they don't rent out land, meaning communities can still afford to live in these areas, but now they also develop these communities. They do things like build infrastructure, which is essential for them to actually survive in these regions. Frankly, contrast this to what we brought in. The benefits of individual ownership. The fact of food security. We give you three structural problems. Fragmented land, over-cultivated land, traditional unscientific practices. On our side of the house, we don't want to go the path of Zimbabwe, where food security was systematically undermined by the policies of land reform. We brought in a world where the structural problem of food security is addressed. At the point where they drop this argument, they drop the largest impact in this debate. Moving on then, my substantive argument. Why reasonable amounts of speculation are beneficial for developing countries. Before that, yes.
Given that selling land often means displacement and unemployment, understated things from our case show a self-fulfilling incentive for these people to utilize their right to sell under law.
Two responses. Firstly, there is more displacement on your side when this is rent prices increasing directly rather than property prices increasing. Secondly, the perverse incentives of these people is to make profit. The way they make profit is to set up businesses, lower prices of goods and give people access to food security, create jobs in these regions. Why are reasonable amounts of speculation beneficial? The problem is, as a structurally disadvantaged nation, fluctuations in the cost of land are damaging. In times of recession, land prices drop. This means lower middle class individuals who spend their savings on land investment and a rising middle class who often starts off with an investment in land lose their investments. They systematically lose their money. This disproportionately hurts them. But in times of inflation, in times of growth, land prices increase. What that also means is that rent prices skyrocket, displacing low-income individuals and creating all the harms of gentrification that they wanted to talk about. But that policy uniquely worsens this fluctuation when they virtually eliminate speculators from these countries, i.e. people who buy land expecting price changes to hope to sell this land at a higher price. Why? Because local investors don't have the kinds of capital to engage in speculation and have a culture of financial conservatism in which they don't make risky investments, means speculation is far more likely to come in through foreign investment. Why does speculation smooth out these fluctuations? Case 1. Let's say land prices are increased. They are more willing to buy land at lower prices because they expect that the price will drop. They often don't speculate on this land at all, and when there is a culture of landowners relying on speculators buying their land, they are likely to force the land prices to go down and stabilize. But secondly, contrastingly, they buy more land and speculate more if prices are unnaturally low because they expect these prices to increase. This means prices of land are significantly smoothened out, meaning we are able to balance the benefits to the most vulnerable individuals. Those who invested in land and spent all their life savings on land, and those who want a house and want to get rent. On our side of the house, we protect individuals from a systemic problem of food security. We cannot buy into a policy that harms land and people.
Now, if regulation fixed everything, the problems that we're discussing right now wouldn't have existed. Which means that they have to understand that regulations have a certain amount of problem, right? One, the application of regulations in the vast majority of cases is very subjective as to whether or not people want these sorts of regulations to begin with. What we are doing is discussing a specific regulation in and of itself, claiming as to whether or not you should stop owning foreign land. But two things I'll be discussing in my speech. First, who gives rights to poor? Second, under which world do we give more autonomy to government and subsequently development? Before which, a few things to point out. The extent of rebuttal that they had to this entire nuanced principle of why you shouldn't give foreigners who plundered with your, countries like land, etc., right, was give them employment, guys. That is the best form of reparation. One, they essentially made you the developing country that you are, in the sense that they took away resources from before, creating these sorts of issues to begin with, right? So if you give employment right now, it's not reparations because they're not giving something back, they're just trying to make amends to it at best. We don't think, ladies and gentlemen, that's a sufficient response. But more importantly, this argument's importance was on the basis of morality, right? Which means that is it really all right to give people who have plundered with their identity before the right to, give them back the right to capitalize on that loophole that they created themselves, right? No response there. So let's move on to the second speaker argument, this weird argument about speculation and why people, under their world can speculate better than under our world. One, speculation isn't an exclusive benefit, which means that analytical articles about whether or not land prices increase exist under our world as well. So developing nations do have access to these sorts of things. So we think that speculation can be an essential benefit under our world. But secondly, why is speculation linked to land ownership? People speculating is not exclusive to them owning land, but rather them analyzing the benefit of, or like the price ranges of it to begin with. And again, they forget domestic owners get own land as well, so they can speculate on a large scale. But secondly, and much more importantly, rights to poor people. Three things that they said here. One, the rights to property. Note three responses here. First, it's not absolute, which means given that they themselves claim that regulations as to how you can use land exist, means that your ownership of land isn't an absolute, so government can make adjustments to it. Secondly, we think that if you say that you have a right to sell, we think you do have a right to sell under our world. The regulation or the limit being you can sell it to foreigners, right? Given that the principle, their principle is contingent upon believing on regulations, we think this can be an additional regulation without harming the right to property. Lastly, and this is very, very weird, note that they say that the alternative is jamindars and why they're, very oppressive to the poor people, right? Note that first, they agree that corporations are much more powerful. So if jamindars are less powerful than corporations, why won't corporations dictate the terms of the poor people? Because clearly they have the upper hand. We have given you incentive structures as to why the rights of these poor people aren't in these corporations' minds, but rather their own needs and wants. So we don't know why that works. But secondly, there can be two instances in this case. One, that the corporation colludes with those jamindars, which happens in a lot of cases to gain easier access to the population. Even under that world, poor people don't get rights. Or, if the jamindar is against that foreign corporation existing, means that they won't essentially let them in. Either way, the problem regarding jamindars, they aren't solving in and of themselves, right? So we don't think that's a benefit under their law. Secondly, they talk about food stamps. Guys, okay, number one. Note that I don't know how that's incredibly relevant in this debate. The reason being, if you want to make yields out of lands better, note that in agriculture-based countries, universities and students, etc. alike do research as to why and how you can utilize smaller amounts of land to begin with. So if you want to be a part of that progression as a foreigner, you can invest in these sorts of researches or invest on local companies who are doing this, become a minority shareholder, and you will get access to the market regardless. So I don't know why that is exclusively better under theirs. But secondly, and this is also quite crucial, they are the ones who takes away agricultural land from poor farmers and gives it to corporations. Under our world, corporations can't beat out these farmers in the level of prices and gain access, so we don't think they give rights to poor in that case. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, is the comparative. And this is the most important part here. Because the extent to which they respond to our gentrification argument is this. Domestic people gentrify as well. Note that you are increasing the extent by tenfolds, so the effects of gentrification is substantially more under your world. But secondly, and their second speaker comes up and tells us why rent apparently increases under our world. Note that when it is under government's hands, which EPZs they lease out, which means government has the set control of these prices, right? So it doesn't trickle down to the rest of the economy. It is under your world, when it's a free bidding process to everyone, there is more rent hikes, right? So we don't think that applies. But the reason why this gentrification argument is so crucial is even if the Gulf accepts the fact that there's probably marginally more employment, because they never told you why, that the market gaps are not filled up by local companies, right? Because I pretty sure think that in a world where foreign corporations don't exist as much, these gaps are filled up by local companies. Why? Their ideas of gentrification, their cost of gentrification is substantially more beneficial than any other forms of effects that we show in terms of minorities, right? Where we essentially told you that these are people who already have very little political capital. When you give them
Information.
when you give the government an incentive to gain access to these sorts of corporations, these people can't fight back. Under our world, in the case of local companies, the ability for these poor people to fight back or at least voice out the fact that they don't want to give up the land is substantially more. So we think on a comparative, we give poor people an easier level to fight back. We stop gentrification to the extent in which they increase it. Before I move on to the last flash, sure.
What's the median size of land owned by the average farmer in Bangladesh?
Not relevant to the debate, I'm not an almanac. Second, let's talk about why government's ability to control development is important. Because this is a part that they really never refuted, right? Because we told you that governments essentially have a roadmap as to what sort of development that they essentially want. In a free market, when foreigners can own land, what happens is they can come by and start building out land. We think that this is problematic for a number of reasons. Because land ownership means that you have certain amount of power over the government, which means that you control these sorts of areas. As a huge corporation who own 10 kilometers of land, all the other areas or small businesses around it depend upon you. A lot of people are employed by you, which means that the ability to dictate the terms of your government relationship is substantially more. So in a world where there's a conflict of interest, only under their world do corporations have a bigger say over the government's economic plan. Whereas in a world where there are no foreign owners, this imbalance of power substantially decreases because note, they don't own land, they are under government leased land, which means government is dictating the terms. In a world where colonies have plundered with lands before, we don't think you should give them the right to do it again. We beg to propose.
It's clear to us at this point that side proposition just has a problem with private investors. I mean, nearly any of the reasons that they gave, gentrification, how having money and being able to lobby and having land exists, how you can displace people, literally every single one of those exists to people who are within the country who have private investment capabilities as well. They realized this in their third speech and they said, yes, that's true, but foreign investors are also private investors and that makes it worse. Here's the thing, panel, in no way is their entire case unique to this motion. All they've stood for in this entire debate is we don't like people who have power, we don't like private property, and we don't like you being able to buy land. That was the problem with the entirety of their case. Three questions to ask in this debate. Firstly, which side respected the decisions of the vulnerable? Secondly, which side was better for developing nations? And thirdly, which side better helped the stability and growth of developing nations in specific? Because we cannot buy into a policy whose harms land on the poor. On the right of you to sell your land. We agreed, both sides, finally in their third speaker they said, you do have the right to sell your land. So let's ask the question, panel, which side actually understood developing countries? Because they actually couldn't use general profit incentives of MNCs are more powerful than zamindars. That was literally the opposite of what we were saying. We were saying, I'm sorry, you don't seem to understand the cultural context here. When for centuries and centuries, the Biponia tribe in Nigeria has held power and managed to control all other tribes, it's not about money, it's not about that, but rather the vast amount of coercive cultural influence that they have. No response to this whatsoever. They come out and say that, oh, what did they collude with the private MNCs? Here's the thing, they're significantly less likely to collude with international MNCs and more likely to collude with themselves. The fact is on their side of the house, you have an oligopoly of a few people who have the power. However, on our side, you have competition coming in from private MNCs who can actually set the terms. We're not even claiming that MNCs are benevolent, but rather breaking up an oligopoly in itself, even if each individual is self-interested, means that prices go down on the poor on our side of the house. It means that you can sell your house at a higher price. These are things that you enable the poor to do on our side of the house, and they snuff that out. Now on that argument of gentrification, we had an extremely strong and consistent response. That is, the poor very often don't own houses, they rent houses. Why in the world side proposition would you want to shift the wealth, the foreign investors, into the renting market? Why would you want to cause even more gentrification on your side when actually the way in which the poor stay in housing is displaced on your side of the house? Not a word of response, note panel, from their government whip. They did not contest with our characterization that the poor don't own it very often. They didn't contest with our characterization that theirs is a side that jacks up lending prices. If they wanted to talk about gentrification, they make it significantly worse. On their side of the house, the poor are displaced in vast amounts. Lastly, on a principle that they wanted to stand by. They said that countries were once colonized and so we shouldn't allow this to happen. Here's the thing, panel. This debate is from the frame of reference of developing nations, what they should do. What that means is, unless they're claiming India should never get into a trade deal with the UK because once they visited for a little too long, they're saying that developing nations and developed nations should never interact in mutually beneficial relationships. We gave you a better principle in our first speech, that each country should decide for itself. We told you we're not going to labor down and say no foreign investment is good or all foreign investment is good. But rather the limits to this should be set by individual countries. We were the side that didn't pretend that Ghana, India, Nigeria and Sri Lanka were all the same. They never refused to that characterization on their side. Which is why we best cared for the rights of the vulnerable and best respected their decisions. Yes.
If private entities are so bad, I'll ask you your own POI again. Would you ban private entities from buying these poor people's land?
Our entire case has been on how private entities actually really help the economy grow and really help these individuals. What we said in my introduction is you need to explain, please, finally in your proposition reply, other than that one principle on reparations, what in your case was unique to multinational corporations and not just rich people within your country. Please do that for me in your reply speech. On the second question, which side helped the nations who needed it the most? On land reform. They had a flippant response finally in their government whip to the biggest argument in this debate. That is, university students do research or you can be a minority shareholder. Firstly, university students aren't going around buying large pieces of land and putting them together. And furthermore, we told you while we need one big person to conglomerate the land together, never responded to. The largest problem is fragmentation of land, panel. When you have land pieces too small for you to build up an economy of scale and actually get food grains out. Being a minority shareholder in a piece of farmland the size of this room is not going to improve food security on their side of the house. No response to this. This is, panel, make no mistake, the single most important argument in this debate, because the people who starve the most are the indigenous communities they wanted to talk about. The people who die in this world massively die because of poverty, disease and starvation. If we could bring the world closer to a world where we stop that harm, we would be happy. They ignored the most important harm in this debate. We also told you, panel, how capital comes in on our side of the house, how MNCs can train people, build jobs and infrastructure. Not that they wanted to say they'll employ other white people on their side, but the moment my second speaker told you there is absolutely no reason to do that, they dropped the point of employment. What that meant is ours was uniquely the side that actually allowed economies to skill up, where they weren't stuck to an agrarian economy. When you can build a middle class and grow up and become a coder, and become someone who's doing something more than just a farmland. That is how you make economies grow up, and they remove that ability on their side. Next on their argument that this messes with the government's ability to plan or handle any influence. Note, let's point out that we didn't stand for a single strict model, but we said for different countries to have different types of regulations, but rather we wouldn't like them to cut out all foreign investment. But furthermore, no one will come into your SECs when on their point they rely on MNCs being perfectly happy with Nigeria having 100% control over where these companies set up, who these companies set up and sell to, and how these companies operate. They have total MNC flight when absolutely all control over the decisions of businesses on their side are controlled by the government. Next, let's look at their SECs uniquely. Because, let's be clear about this panel, they set them up in horrible places. They set them up in the cheapest of places, displacing most indigenous communities on their side. Because unless they do that, the state is literally buying up the most expensive land and renting it out to companies. I would suggest that would put a dent in your healthcare budget. What that means is their side actually gentrifies the most. The gentrifier now is the state, who, surprise, surprise, isn't always that great to indigenous communities. Their side is actually doing gentrification significantly worse. The SECs they stand for are in their best case weak, in their worst case horrible. At the end of the day, let's just deal with the last part on owning land giving you political capital. We actually think owning land within a country gives the government more control over you and helps regulations work more. The reason for this is now you are tied to that area. You can't simply up and leave. What that means, man, is regulations are more effective on our side of the house rather than less, which means that we actually best control the investment and help these countries. But on the third question, which side that helps the long-term growth? We gave you a long argument on speculation, and they don't understand what speculation is. They said you can do research. Here's the thing, this is the way speculation works. If prices are too low, people physically buy the land and therefore stabilize the prices. There is no response to this whatsoever throughout the entire case. The impact of this panel is huge because it means in a recession, I don't lose all the value in my house. It means in an inflation, my rent payments don't become become more than my daily or my yearly income. That is a massive benefit on our side of the house. When the poor didn't have to look at their housing prices and seeing fall into rock bottom, they misunderstood what the word speculation meant. What it actually means is financial investors keeping the price stable. At the end of the day, 3 questions to ask. Did they respect the choices of the vulnerable? Did they actually provide a route to development for the countries? And did they care about the most vulnerable who are starving on the streets? We say no, we cannot buy into a policy whose harms stand on the poor.
My second speaker progresses that case and very clearly explains to you how food security is so crucial in the developing world. He describes a number of harms that come in the absence of it, not being able to afford grains, diseases caused by malnutrition. And to this, for the most part of the case, we heard deafening silence. Third proposition also fails to respond to the nuance of the argument that you need to amass land and create a necessary scale of production which you can't do in the absence of foreign investors. In the lack of responding to that nuance is why Bangladesh loses. We cannot buy into a policy which harms land or the poor. 2 things there. First, on the idea of developing nations and what's best for them, and second, as to whether this is justified. First, what's best for developing nations? Right? What kind of investment is this debate about? Because sparsely do they actually describe how any of their cases is relevant to land, nor do they describe how it's relevant to individual owners. By third opposition, it just became rich people are bad people. Look, as an individual, as a friend between Bangladesh, I can agree, right? But what they fail to realize is that there is a massive amount of benefit that comes from multinational corporate capital. When we look back to the kinds of 19th centuries and 20th centuries that existed in the developing world, we see that's a scary world. We don't want to go back to that. But what burden did they end up taking? They just said private capital is bad, right? Because all of the harms were generalizable across private capital. Because like my third speaker points out to you, at a point it sounded like they were pushing for a world where developed nations and developing nations shouldn't interact at all. We told you, it might be true that they plundered us, right? But it means that they have the capital which we so crucially need. And we need the benefits of that capital, that's what they have. But did they meet the burden that they took upon themselves? They never show us what the alternative of this developing world is. How they actually better off on their side. Because notice, they were the proposition to this debate as opposed to just complaining about investments. But they just say, no, we get benefits if brown people do this as well. But this was also a confusing response because for all the harms in this debate, they said if less people do it, it's better. For all the benefits, if less people do it, it was somehow still better, right? They realized how much a lack of capital existed on their side of the house. That's why they deprioritized their own argument on foreign investment across the bench and kept talking about special economic zones. But we were so charitable to respond to that as well. We said you need the control over where you set up. That kind of benefit comes from, for example, being able to buy up mass piece of uncultivated land and invest in building the nutrition for that land. Deafening silence to this. They didn't meet their own burden. Let's be charitable. Let's presume they didn't actually take that burden. What is the only argument they had? An argument on gentrification. An argument on gentrification that never moved past their first speech, right? Because when we told you that the reality of the developing world is a vast majority of individuals so reliant on rent that you make it worse when people switch to renting out land. That we told you that gentrification in your best case continues to happen, but in your worst case happens in renting, which is far worse for these people. But ultimately they dropped a bunch of their characterization, dropped the arguments on lobbying because they realized regulation works. So then they asked, why does regulation work? But clearly we tell you across the bench that regulation works because private investors have monetary interest in these nations. They've invested there, so they need and can be held accountable. What is our case? Food security, cheap foods, people having the capital to retrain themselves, speculation being good. They never understood what speculation was because he said you can analyze trends. That's not speculation. Speculation is having the risk profile to buy land in a time of recession and save the middle class from losing their wealth. Finally, on the idea of principle, they say we benefit from the loopholes of the developing world. This was ridiculously blown and so blown apart. This meant the US military could never enter any deal. We shouldn't get aid from them because they're benefiting from our past oppression. But they kept hitting us that corporations will dictate the terms and zamindars will still have power. But we told you the unique incentive or the unique market for private investors is that they come as competition to zamindars, is that they let you set your own terms. Ultimately, we weren't patronizing to the poorest of the poor. We said, go ahead, make your choices. We cannot buy into a policy whose harms land of the poorest.
There are clear deliberate strategy to win the quarterfinals has been to literally dismiss most of our argumentations, strawman everything out of it, and claim that they have defeated our case. They gave you a few things. They never give you a few things. First, right? Like they never give you incentives behind MNCs to cater to these people. We told you why they have incentives to exploit them, and the fact that most of these people won't have any capacity to oppose that. They never explain why private investors won't have the incentive to buy this land and cater to those people. What's the exclusive reason why foreigners will come and buy this land and cater to those people? I don't really know. They gave you this really flimsy incentive called a unique market. If that really is so unique and so precious, I think those sort of FDI will happen in our side of the house as well, in the absence of an ownership of this land. I think those sorts of ways in which you cater to those people will happen if that unique market does exist. All the rebuttals have been constrained to why these sort of harms happen with private investors owning land as well. Sure, we agree that some of these harms do overlap, which is the exact reason why when most of these harms overlap, such as gentrification, little forced displacement of people, we said why we are going to oppose that. But the fact is this, the harms of this gentrification and forced migration of people get a lot greater on your side of the house, when it's just not only private investors in your own country, but also foreign owners, and the fact that foreign owners can lobby the government to an extent that they can, the government and those people can do nothing about it. That's the comparative that you needed to address. The response to gentrification was that, one, renting prices will rise in our world as well, so these local people can't buy land. They clearly don't understand how EPZs work. The fact is this, EPZ regions don't necessarily work in terms of a bidding process. The government finds and allocates a land, sets up a price for that, which often to a great degree is done in order to cater to those people. If government regulation is an incentive for your side, that incentive exists on our side of the house as well. Secondly, they told you why speculation happens in some house that stabilizes that market. If that is such an effective tool in order to stabilize the market, that happens on our side of the house as well when private investors go and buy land and try to cater to those people. I don't know why that's exclusive incentive for foreigners to buy land and cater to those people. They claim government is against FDI and we apparently are against interacting with developed countries. If that was really true, we would have blocked trade, we would have blocked FDI to EPZs and everything. That is clearly not the argument. We told you that the exclusivity of labor, the exclusivity of land is such that we cannot allow these foreigners to own land and lobby the state to the degree that they are doing right now, and the ability to exploit the people in those regions get massively increased on your side of the house. They merely claim that MNCs will cater to those people with no incentive. So the first part of our argument was that these people can't buy food and they need money. We told you why there is not enough, this money is often not enough because A, because this is cheap land, and B, this land owned by minorities like tribes and etc. So there is no incentive to give them enough money. But the problem is they have a narrowed down case where this is land that is over-cultivated, where the poor people need cash more than that land and everything. If that was really true, then probably your case is about how we should allow foreigners to own over-cultivated land and not every land possible. That's a horribly narrowed down case. But then they tell you why their policy has an incentive to give them food because you'll give them food stamps. One, I don't see why there's an incentive to do that after you've already bought the land and given them money. But secondly, that incentive does exist. We think private investors would also do that as well, because apparently that incentive is not dependent on any context. They told you why these poor people will get jobs. They told you why employment is likely to be constrained to all those foreigners because they're more likely to have skill sets that coincide with these corporations. They're more likely to train those foreigners because it's less costly and less expensive to train them rather than these minorities and these poor people who are often uneducated in developed countries who didn't get the educational resources from the government. At the end of this debate, they never tackled the important principle why ownership of land and usage of it is in and of itself immoral. Even if you tell that oppression exists on both sides, we think this oppression that comes with the ownership of land and usage is in and of opinions for all these people very fast.